Gastronaut contains strong language. Viewer discretion is advised. Riddle for the ages, listeners. What makes a passenger ship a passenger ship? A smartass would say, the ability to carry passengers, but come on, it's kind of a broad brush to paint with, right? Most vessels, whether they're looming rail ships or ponderous slow-boat freighters or zippy Atmos shuttles, have the incredible ability to move people from place to place. If I lock someone in the trunk of my car, that doesn't magically make it a taxi cab. An economist would say that a passenger vessel makes most of its money off its travelers, plying the rails between worlds on the value of their ticket sales. Before I started Gastronaut, I would have had the same answer. But my current accommodation, the Good Enough Kanamori, has proven you can multitask garbage hauling with people moving. And look, I'm never going to claim this Hulk as a passenger vessel, so get that nonsense out of here. I'll spare you the suspense, listener. In this humble food journalist's opinion, what makes a passenger vessel is how much of its hull is devoted to entertainment, to giving people something to do while they travel between the stars during the months of acceleration and deceleration. There isn't anything out there. I don't care how much cosmic horror tells you otherwise. And true passenger vessels are well aware of this fact. So, because there's not much to engage the senses outside the ship, the interiors are veritable wonderlands of things to do. Thousands of movies, audiobooks, travel simulations, historical accounts, video games, all pre-downloaded into shipboard venues, viewable in the comfort of your own cabin or in dozens of configurable entertainment centers. There are gymnasiums, saunas, fisheries, rock climbing centers with simulated wind. I heard the Ford Olympus had a petting zoo, but only for a year, until the lawsuits closed it down. And the food. You'd be dizzy from all the food and drink available to a passenger in flight. While I rode my previous ship, the Singular Devotion, I ate at 4 different locations. Realize, listeners, that represented 8% of all eateries on the vessel. And of those eateries, that was just a minuscule fraction of their total menu. I had a whole meal plan written up, folks. The plan was to do themed episodes of nothing but luxury food. It was going to be amazing. Sorry that I can't show you that. So for the rest of those out in space, there aren't nearly as many options for meals. Passenger vessels are common, but they also don't account for all point-to-point traffic. This means a lot of boredom, a lot of samey lunches, a lot of life lived under contract stipulations that aren't as much negotiated as they are imposed. And with all these restrictions, sometimes you get some atypical behavior on the margins, where boredom turns to appetite. Yeah, that's right. Today, we're going to talk about food that isn't food. The things people eat that they absolutely shouldn't. We're going to talk about forbidden snacks. I'm Oscar Yasui, formerly a professional food critic, currently an independent food journalist, and you're listening to Gastronaut. Let me just say, this is an exciting topic for me, and one I've been dying to have an excuse to cover. Back when I worked for the internet publication giant Palladium, I floated this concept dozens of times under dozens of different names. My editors found the idea cute, but they'd always say, Oscar, this isn't where we need your talents, or Oscar, this really is content suited for a younger writer, or Oscar, please, it's 2 a.m., just go back to sleep and work on what we tell you to work on. Well, now that Palladium doesn't get to choose what I do with my time, and since I don't want to review bulkheads and bunk beds for a whole episode, we get to talk a little about this. Take that, Shannon. Reject my drafts now, Eric. My unemployment has made me invincible. Ground rules then, listeners. What exactly is a forbidden snack, anyway? A forbidden snack is something a person categorically should not eat. It isn't a triple-decker burger dripping with 3 kinds of sauce and 6 kinds of cheese. It isn't that last slice of chocolate cake tempting you to break your analog diet. It isn't a second helping of salty, greasy fish and chips. Look, as an excessive person, I can't sit here and shame other people for excess. We're talking long hauls between planets and system, voyages to boring, unmapped regions of Sol and beyond. These are the meals of the deprived, of the desperate, of the craving. However, and I'm sorry to disappoint some of you, but we aren't talking about cannibalism or pet eating. Yeah, sorry, but I have my reasons. First, most of those horrible events are widely publicized anyway. Novelists love them, film studios love them, anonymous media conglomerates love them. At this point, you've heard all the gory details. Second, they're boring. Starvation, real, desperate, end-time starvation, plays out the same way every single time. And the way it plays out, it's miserable, listeners. Circumstances that make mine look like a basket of kittens. Forbidden snacks are restricted foods. Restricted by policy, like how a warehouse operator can't chew on high-end graphics cards. Restricted by decency, like a co-worker's Cuban sandwich sitting in the fridge. Restricted by biology and common sense, like, bleach, I guess. I think bleach is a good example of that last one. So all that aside, let's dive into my collected notes on forbidden snacks. We'll keep it simple for this first part, to ease all of you into the culture of the not food of deep space. Let's talk about the case of the smoothie of shame. Listeners, what drives a person to snack on cherry-flavored lip balm, to drink a milkshake of anti-wrinkle face cream, to carve a swath through a sealed container of spearmint toothpaste? We've established that as magical as rail travel is, what with breaching reality and all, it can actually get pretty boring. So, imagine how the shipping lanes in the core triangle, that's Earth, Mars, and Venus, how do they feel with their large volume slow boat spacecraft? For the few humans who still work on these ships alongside the drone fleet, there isn't much to do as you cross that 3-month gap between planets. 4 years ago, I caught up with a crewman who will remain unnamed, who once served aboard a vessel traveling between Earth and Venus. They hauled almost everything you could possibly think of in that massive freighter. A freighter whose scale dwarfed that of the rail ships I ride on. In that cargo hold, there were land and air vehicles, massive piles of electronics, tritium in heavily shielded containers, comestibles, consumer products. This was an entire national economy, bolted and wired to a fusion thruster. Now my source, let's call them A, was something of an Epicurean. They prized the food of their home in Leon, the wines, the salted pistachios, milk from actual farms. So when they boarded their vessel, A was starved of flavor. Their extrusion array, it was always on the blink. Everything it made to eat, it all tasted a little bit like everything else. Textures and consistencies weren't at all what they imagined. It wasn't what they wanted. There were meal kits aboard the vessels, but they were emergency rations, sealed by the interior intelligence aboard. Crack them open, and that could mean an infarction charge from corporate. So they got it in their heads to do some cooking. They needed ingredients. But see, ingredients? Those aren't all that easy to come by aboard a vessel in interplanetary space. But back in the Wild West of space trucking, it was a total free-for-all. Crew had knowledge and drive to crack open cargo for personal use and even resale. My source couldn't confirm for certain, but the general belief was that companies tended to build some level of miscellaneous loss into their profit margins. The crew stole food as well. Think about it. Entire product lines of sugary cereal or tins of smoked salmon. It was all just a whistle and walk away for them. A assured me that back then, back when they were a young, starry-eyed crewman who still found space travel exciting, crews would hold feasts in the common area. For birthdays, for anniversaries, or just for the hell of it. Imagine a cake that, in gravity, could only be transported by forklift. Imagine that cake split among 4 to 6 people. Imagine a sandwich like something out of a buffer short, long as 30 people, fingertip to fingertip, drifting in a spinal corridor. Imagine a glob of tapioca so vast that, if my source can be believed, 2 grown professional spacers almost drowned in the stuff, coughing on those little pearly lumps. My source said that they call each other rats, with all the scratching and gnawing they did, as a little self-deprecating joke. But you see, from the heady description they offered of all their meals, these rats lived like kings. It didn't last, of course. And if you can believe it, the sunset of those great years emerged from food. It didn't last, of course. This is the part that you might remember, listeners, assuming you're old enough or maybe you're just paying attention. The Giardia duodenalis media craze. For my younger audience, Giardia duodenalis is a parasite of the intestines. Let's just see here. Nausea, abdominal bloating, vomiting, and get the idea. The sickness, it's nasty stuff. Survivable, but the kind of thing you remember. There was an outbreak of giardiasis that was traced back to a freighter. The public got frightened, and then all of a sudden, you got these accounts going around the buffer. Reports of freighter crews doing nasty things to the food. Strangely timed and inescapably viral stories of the terrible escapades aboard the vessels. Escapades from people who joked about being rats. Not a good animal to be associated with during a disease scare. The crews of freighters felt a bell tolling for them somewhere. And 4 months later, the security on food cargo was so tight, the punishments for skimming so high, that the feasts went the way of the cetaceans. Extinct. A found this darkly hilarious. Just the food, listeners. They still skim non-perishables, and it was those non-perishables which gave A an idea. They had this terrible craving for a berry smoothie, the kind they'd whipped together at home from their own garden. They loved the feeling of opening their doors, plucking strawberries and blueberries, still wet with morning dew, feeling the weight of a cupped handful. To A, this summer ritual was the single greatest way to start the day, and without any access to the produce that was shipped aboard their vessel, A took let's call it an alternative route. They donned a pressure suit and walked among the crates. They tracked their craving through the walls and gantries of items, until they came across an industrial cargo container marked with Kenneman's Interstellar logo, that K and E beneath an arc of shimmering metallic stars. What they wanted in that container was packed together in abundance, swaddled in plastic like something carelessly precious. Kenneman's Quick Lip Dock brand, Summer Strawberry. Scented chapstick, listeners. This might sound completely insane, but let's spare a thought for A's point of view here. They explained that we eat almost all the chapstick we lather over our dry lips anyway. They illustrated that if it was safe to put on the lips, it had to be safe to ingest. And what's more, flavor, it's almost entirely scent, right? It isn't. We both knew it wasn't, but olfaction is an important part of taste, as anyone with a stuffy nose in an upscale steakhouse will grimly and repeatedly tell you. After gathering enough for their needs, the rest of A's crime was fairly straightforward. With a paint chipper and a sculptor's precision, they gathered condensation that had frosted across the coolant cells of the vessel's life support system. Cream was added by stealing flavoring agents from the already faltering extrusion array. The concoction, when it was complete, was awful. Horrible. Chapstick is a viscous and slick substance, and though it is engineered to smell sweeter than the berry itself, it doesn't really deliver on the taste front. Couple that with a cream facsimile that tasted a little like chicken curry, and you've got something truly wretched here. A drank it down in 2 long pulls, pausing only to gag into the crook of their elbow. They described it as a beverage that rebelled against the very act of being swallowed. A wretch-worthy slush of ice and cream that tasted of meat, clotted with strawberry-scented bergs of paraffin and petrolatum. But drink it they did, with tears welling at the corners of their eyes, wrestling their own esophagus. A victory of pride over muscle. Afterwards, they found themselves cleaning their glass with wet wipes at a zero-G station, throwing a look over their shoulder in fear someone would stumble upon their crime against human decency. But nobody ever stumbled on it. So, when A painted this picture to me, they did so while twisting their fingers, but also giggling like a schoolchild. They told me that it was a nice thing, getting all this off their chest. That it wasn't the kind of story that ever felt right to tell. A, their cheeks still flushed, leaned across the table to tell me one final secret. They went back for more. Listeners, despite what you've heard in this podcast, I do try to keep a level of courteous professionalism during interviews. But on being told A's experiment had become an ongoing staple, My eyes goggled. My lips parted, my eyebrows broke from my hairline like geese in autumn. And let me tell you, A loved my reaction. Terrible as the beverage was, it beat the slop from the extrusion array, and it gave A a sense of agency in what they chose to eat. Traveling to the cargo containers became something of a ritual for them, which they likened to picking berries in their garden back on Earth. And the craving didn't stop there. Sometimes I'd bust open wintergreen shaving cream containers and foam it into my morning coffee, A told me. Or I'd crack open those little phone keychains and pull the tiny scented fruits off them to chew during my shift. I couldn't stop myself. At this point, I was tearing it up in the cargo bay once or twice a week. Nobody questioned what I was doing. I mean, we were all stealing a little, yeah? It only got out of hand when I set my bag of coffee down and someone grabbed it to take a closer look. At that point, I'd been eating this for 2 years. A's crew member urged them to get psychological counseling. A was diagnosed with pica, a relatively rare psychiatric condition where an individual feels a compulsion to eat things that are firmly outside the category of food. And I'm not doing that, A said. Not anymore. I managed to wean myself off the stuff over time. Now I just budget a bit more for commercial dinners when I'm on hauls. Lightens my pocket every paycheck, sure. But my innards have really thanked me for the decision. A might seem strange, listeners, and while I'm not giving chapstick and shaving cream the Oscar Yasui stamp of culinary excellence anytime soon, we do have to view their narrative with a fisheye lens. There are stories like this hovering at the margins of every community that spends its time largely in space. Which brings us, listeners, to the case of the airlock snack pack. So this story comes to me from another source, who naturally does not want to be named, and is confirmed by their fellow crewmen. Let's refer to these individuals as B and C. Now, according to B and C, for a ship to be a functional piece of transportation infrastructure, that is to say, usable in a capacity beyond art installation, there needs to be some way to get inside the thing. Enter airlocks, emergency pressure gates, and the foamed composite gaskets that enable their function. B and C offered me a technical breakdown on modern door construction, just enough jargon to leave me dizzy and impatient. But for the purposes of editing, I'll give you the short and sweet version. Gaskets are flexible sealant materials that keep atmosphere where people can breathe it, and vacuum where it can't hurt anyone. That better be good enough for all of you, because I can't add any diagrams to this audio podcast. Look, I've got a great voice, I've got a talent for description, but I'm not a wizard. If I was a wizard, you'd think I'd dispel all this dead hovering around me. Alakazam! Yeah. So, B and C were surveyors for a governmental body that, you guessed it, I can't mention for the podcast. They rode a reconnaissance parasite vessel, linking up with specialized carrier ships during rail passage. Their recon craft was an old, bulbous thing with 6 great trailing solar sails, a golden-winged dragonfly with a meteorite-scarred exoskeleton, peering at rocks and dust that hurtled far and away from anything that mattered to anybody. The 2 of them were the only crew aboard the whole ship, the only company they'd have for months at a stretch. So, it wasn't much of a surprise that B and C had a habit of interrupting each other? Well, no, interrupting isn't exactly the word. They were like 2 wings on a bird, or 2 cogs in a watch. B twirled a digital pressure meter in his hands as he spoke, a look of focused solemnness on his face. I think we gave it a shot out near, he began. But C chimed in, always in motion, always with B's hand clasped in hers. Zetatoni 7, the rock that was shaped like a banana. I swear I don't understand how anyone could get into the rock cracking business. It's all just one big gambling racket. Like panning for gold. Yeah. Scan a rock, roll the dice, scan a rock. That's where we started eating the little tears and scraps of gasket insulation. There was a moment of silence between the 3 of us. I hadn't exactly expected them to just admit to eating airlock gaskets, but admit it they did. B elbowed C, and C let out a wild cackle. Come on, C. We didn't just start stuffing it into our mouths, and we never swallowed. For us, it was like chewing gum, just like eating chewing gum. Sweet and tangy with just a little burn. Yeah, burn in the back of your throat. Addicting. Probably bad for you. The 2 of them laughed, but I found myself racing to keep up, my pen flying over my notepad, a habit I learned after a nasty recording error nearly cost me my first journalist job. It was my inability to keep up that seemed to embarrass them, making them aware of their own blistering pace of dialogue. I found this a bit surprising considering they already admitted to using industrial sealant as a masculatory treat. C piped up first, all smiles, all pink blush. Sorry about the barrage. We're selected. For compatibility, to avoid any kind of mishaps out there, yeah? This is just sort of how we talk now. You sort of get used to it. The two of them explained that it happened during one of their many, many dare nights. Despite all the talk of modernization, most of the asteroid belts still lack buffer connection, and the Hilda asteroids and Jupiter Trojans are almost entirely untouched. So an enterprising couple of prospectors has to get creative to stay occupied. Ghost stories, exercise competitions, sex, low-stakes gambling, and dare night. The gasket had come loose, so B dared me to take a bite of it. I was joking. Yeah, you say that now. C just reached out and grabbed a pinch of the stuff. I peeled it right off the wall and popped it into her mouth. Done and done. We both thought it was super gross, but I won the dare and got to advance. You still lost. It was a moral victory. But it didn't end there. C started taking nips of sealant throughout the week, chewing it again and again, appreciating its springiness, the bad chemical sweetness of the grayish-white mass, the feeling of it dividing and recombining between her teeth. She kept at it. The habit wasn't hard to hide from B, despite the cramped quarters of the little scout craft. She'd flick a hand down to peel a bit from the lining on the airlocks. She'd reach over B in bed after he'd fallen asleep to snag some from the ventilation work. It was an old ship, so all the gaskets were already flaking and peeling. C had chosen the perfect snack food, accessible, inconspicuous, and ubiquitously available. After they finished with their work at Zeta 27, the two of them moved on to their next zone of operations. But C couldn't stop herself. I was like a little termite, and I was having a ball, she said of her habit. I asked them how B caught her, and the two snickered in response, grinning ear to ear. It was like some gift of the Magi shit. B didn't catch me. Nah, I caught him. I had been snacking on sealant for a bit by then. C beat me there, but we, kind of had the same idea in our head around the same time. Compatibility, C crowed. It was kind of a bonding exercise for them, something they couldn't tell anyone. A fun little secret they'd laugh about, an inside joke. They only slowed their nibbling when a surprise inspection got them in trouble. The biggest concern being the ragged quality of the gaskets all around their vessel. Maintenance didn't have a problem with the gaskets when they were aging out on their own. But the moment we start chewing on the stuff, it's suddenly an issue? Ugh. We switched to gum instead. We buy the stuff in bulk. I guess you might say we have, what's it called? An oral fixation, see? And the two of them shared a look and laughed. Listeners, this is a widespread practice, more widespread than typically receives attention. In many cases, as you will no doubt notice later on this episode, society only picks up on these little habits when things turn messy. But those are just the stories that are guaranteed to get the most headlines. The stories with a negligent spacer, an inexplicable appetite, and sometimes a body count. But dig a little deeper. Take a look beneath the surface stories, and you start encountering this behavior all over known space. Wherever there's a lonely crewman or isolated workforce, there are salvage reports, blurry with artifacting from repeated duplication, listing damaged terminals in old spacecraft. Terminals are little voids where candy bride diodes and fixtures once rested. Medical reports of crew complaining of stomach maladies, indigestion, vomiting, and cramps. For example, here's a snippet from an interview with a tug pilot stationed around Uranus. Yeah, I've eaten the buttons off a flight terminal. I can forward you the doctor's records to prove it too. Why did I do it? I used to pry them up off the board. The ones that didn't really do much. The ones I didn't need immediately, I'd pry them up and pop them into my mouth, just, feel them. And then one day, I had a pressure alarm, a false reading but loud as all hell, and I just swallowed the little blue light I was rolling around my teeth. It was an accident then, and I kept telling myself it was an accident when it kept happening. There are stations hanging above the stark white and fissured surface of Europa, where liquid water is drawn up from beneath the icy crust of that world and used to grow salmon and trout and snapper and anchovy. These ecological analyses, they're funded by the same interests that are hoping that the next big colony project isn't out there. It's right here in good old Seoul. Now, the researchers on these stations, they aren't supposed to eat the fish in the tanks, due to policy. But, if you can believe the chatter from Savage and Podesto, you'll hear about fish fries and sashimi contests and these awesome little cook-offs held furtively, where security doesn't roam. But on these stations, you also see people sometimes grabbing a glass aquarium marble or two. That's those little blue, green, or clear things at the bottom of the tank. They take these and they swallow them. According to disciplinary and maintenance reports, they disappear from the tanks all the time, and researchers again have those stomach issues that, if you look at the larger pattern, seem to be so prevalent among long-haul small population vessels. If you don't believe me, there are actual audio files of microphones being pressed up to the bellies of these employees, and if you listen closely, beneath the gurgle of chyme through piping, you can even hear the little clack-clack of glass on glass. On low-voltage cabling, the kind of wiring used to charge pads and phones and some augments, you'll find molar marks, divoted right into the plastic sheathing. Not on by haulers and long-hop shuttlecraft pilots. You folks at home can check this one out too. Ask to borrow one. You'll see for yourself in moments the nips and bites and dents all over. And it isn't exclusively a Sol system thing. Ships that are hauled in all the way out from the colonies show that exact same telltale wear. The missing keys, the toothed wires, the inconsistent inventory reports, the stomach issues, all of it. This is why Palladium totally canned this story. And no, let me stop you. It's not because they don't want you to hear it. There is no they, listeners. The people in control have offices and receptionists and podcasts. Palladium canned this story because it's unbelievable. It's the sort of thing you disregard. It reads like a work of total fiction, a fabrication by someone desperate for a word count. But no, it's real. Hey, I didn't have to write any of this down. I could have just toured another cake expo. Listeners, I'm absolutely crazy about cake expos. Did you know there are 578 different types of cakes that are eligible for entry? That at these expos you can taste all of them for free? Do you realize that the concept of eligible cakes implies an exciting world of illicit dessert? Look, I'm getting excited just thinking about it. Back on the subject of forbidden snacks, no major outlet is reporting on them. So somebody has to say something. It's real. And it can have some serious consequences. Consequences that go far beyond an upset stomach and an ulcerated intestinal tract. Let's talk about the case of... This one doesn't get a cutesy kids mystery novel title. That wouldn't be funny or ethical. 19 years ago, at Dockyard Module 09 of Telefortuna, the Martian station was experiencing its busiest period of shipping. A lot of cultures love the 12th month of Earth. Holiday season, end of fiscal quarter 4. Close your eyes and you can picture it. Hell, maybe you've lived it. Passengers disembarking onto the station, hurrying to catch a connecting shuttle flight, or meeting family, or taking a rest from the trip. Cargo moving in all directions, baggage on mag trains, sitting in storage, waiting for crews to remember them, and lights on everything, twinkling on little plastic trees or strung in great winding constellations of microdrones. It's magical. It's always magical. And then there comes this shadow. Pretty common on a busy dock. Shuttles and freighters are coming and going at all hours. My dad, he used to bring me to Shuttle Spot on Earth, and those were wonderful memories. On Telefortuna, a handful of people scattered through the crowd. They started to see this shadow coming. Light cargo freighter, planetary lifter for areas with less surface-to-space capability. Backlit by the sun, so it's just a silhouette. Can't make out the details around the halo it's dragging behind it. Only a scant few people know something is wrong. In a traffic control room, a group of men and women are speaking calmly and very urgently. Fingers flying across keys, pouring signals at the incoming vessel. It is all the effect of rain on a mountain. A threshold is crossed, and the mood in that small room shifts gears. A finger crashes against a button whose surface is dusty, free of scrapes and scars. Great big alarm on the promenade now. Everyone's running from Dock 09. Pushing and shoving, trying to work their way around anyone moving too slow. A few people fall, lift their arms to deflect as many boots as they can. Telefortuna, it's a big ring station with spin gravity. That keeps your bones from decaying, which is nice, but downside? You can't really be trampled in micrograph. On Telefortuna, you can. There is a grinding of metal and the long, low whine of heavy-duty hydraulics. The view of the incoming ship, now much larger, narrows, then disappears as the exterior doors slide shut. Then there's a noise, like the end of the world, and the lights just cut out. 19 years ago, the light cargo vessel Periwinkle, while attempting to dock with Telefortuna, failed to decelerate and enter the cargo dock 09. Without any way to contact the vessel successfully, Flight Control opted to shut the exterior cargo doors and weather the impact. The Periwinkle blew right through those doors, but lost enough energy to only wreck the interior of 09. The lives lost in the collision included the Periwinkle's crew of 5, as well as 13 holiday travelers who died during a stampede for the concourse exits. That and a long list of injured. What happened here? Well, though the Periwinkle lacked the speed and mass to destroy the Telefortuna, the vessel was grievously damaged when it burst through the cargo bay's doors. Forensic studies and black box rips were released a few months later, but held by the ship's contract corporation, Courier Jinshung, until only 2 years ago. The crew were present at their seats, and they were attempting to control the Periwinkle right up to its collision with 09. Was it an issue of experience? No. Had the Periwinkle docked, it would have been their 30th successful landing at Telefortuna alone. The blame lay with an ordinance passed down from Courier Jinshung, a far-reaching alcohol ban across all of their vessels, with enforcement methods ranging from mandatory counseling services to suspension from duty without pay. And this wasn't for struggling individuals either. This was a complete zero-tolerance policy. The crew of the Periwinkle had complied with these new orders, but their compliance was a bit more creative. Aboard the Periwinkle, after inspection had cleared their vessels alcohol-free, the crew drank something that gave them all the kick they needed during their long months of boredom. They broke out stashes of dextromethorphan. Courier Jinshung was looking hard for alcohol, but they weren't looking for alternatives. Cough medication isn't inherently bad, but down enough of the stuff without any regard to dosage or warning labels, and you'll get yourself into trouble fast. And I mean trouble like nausea, tachycardia, seizures, and symptoms of intoxication. It's right on the label. Do not operate heavy machinery. We don't have records of what occurred in the Periwinkle. The crew did their drinking in secret. But to go full op-ed here, I don't like the mental image that they drank furtively. All flasks and spiked drinks. I like to imagine they gathered for little drinking ceremonies, chatting and laughing, trying to make that long trip pass faster. They shouldn't have done what they did, but I think they've already paid as much as anyone can for their mistake. From what we understand, they weren't malicious people, the crew of the Periwinkle. I guess there's got to be nothing wrong with hoping they had a bit of levity before what happened, right? Yeah, listeners, you can probably tell that some of these aren't as cute as the others. And that trend, it's not slowing down for our 5th and final story of this segment of Forbidden Snacks. The Case of the Seeing Talismans. It's a dramatic name, I know, but it's fully justified. I don't have a personal source for this one. No one-on-one interviews over lunch or in a starport waiting room. In this particular case, I've pulled my information from a variety of accounts from other journalists, both amateur and professional. In vessels across the Sol system and beyond, from Mercury to Lestrade to fucking Yalda, on shuttles and freighters and junkers and trawlers and tugs and cruisers and yachts and all things that exist in between. In this reality, you can find people who eat eyeballs. Yeah, I know, listeners. I told you that I wasn't going to talk about cannibalism. Well, I'm not, okay? I promise. These aren't actual eyeballs. They aren't lab-grown flesh structures, they aren't pried out of animals, and they certainly aren't human eyes. These are small balls of cast resin, filled with glimmering shards and streaks of a reflective red metal, shavings of defunct spacecraft. Their makers fashioned them about 100 different ways. Sometimes the pupils are almond-shaped, or a felonid slash. Sometimes they're a W, a V, or a triplicate for the Trinity. Many are manufactured in great presses, but fundamentally the practice is still, it's artisanal, it's handmade. That means that these thousands, possibly millions of eyes are sailing through space, and they're all a little bit unique, all a little bit different from one another. There are spacegoers who take these little spheres, hidden like charms in their backpacks and pockets, and they swallow them. I hear you can drink something to make them go down easier, like little chunky pills, or you can grease them up with something tasty. Some sources have claimed they can be slipped into another person's food, but I don't know, listeners. They would be a hard thing to just slip into something. They aren't that small. Then, once you've gotten them inside yourself, they gently settle into your stomach and pass through your body, twisting and turning with your plumbing, wrapping and tapping against the interior walls of your intestine. And, I'm not going to draw you a picture. You know how the story ends. It comes back out. Why? Why would anybody swallow resin and metal? That sounds wild, right? Well, listeners, let me answer that question with another question. Isn't the modern age a little wild? If you told the people of 300 years ago that we'd be out in the stars, slipping between reality and another unknowable not space, they'd put a watchful eye on you. And that is exactly what these little resin pills are. They are literal watchful eyes. See, for all the advancement we've made in spaceflight, radiation is still just as scary as it's always been. Detection systems have shrunk and improved. You've got your little pentagons that you can clip onto your front pocket, your little styluses that you can wave tentatively at suspect gas leaks, but you're still playing hide-and-go-seek with death. You're trusting your systems won't fail. You're trusting that scientists got their theories right. After all, if any of your sensors get it wrong, then you can get sterilized in a heartbeat. You can get cancers that they're costly to treat, everyone knows this, or if you're not wealthy, they can be a death sentence. And at higher doses, you don't have to worry about cancer. You could die in minutes. You won't even have enough time to get out of your suit. An invisible killer. We think about it like people think about brain-eating amoebas. 1 in a million. But what if you're that unlucky idiot? What if your number is up? Because when conventional wisdom is no comfort, we can always turn to ritual. Double safety. When you badly want to see your family again, when you don't want to experience a death by radiation-induced cerebral hemorrhage, one layer of protection won't be enough to help you sleep at night. These eyes, which go by names like Seeing Stones or Little Lookouts or Nazar if you've got a taste for the classics, you can find these at any station. Exit at the docking port and shift past the claustrophobia and noise, the step and wait rhythm of customs, the flash of advertisements and safety bulletins. Just inside the entry gate, or maybe 100 yards away if the station is plagued by an over-enthusiastic security force, you'll see street vendors, walls of colorful snack packaging, bottled water, wireless appliance chargers, chocolates and cheerful tins, and beneath it all there will be little eyes staring up at you, glimmering beneath lights like jewelry on display. Go deeper in, and you'll find them peering up at you from baskets in convenience stores, maybe nestled into a little plastic bin at coffee shops. Down an alleyway or pinched between a bookstore and a boutique, you might find the office of a counselor, a little 2-room shop that smells strongly of incense, that is lit by flittering mechanical fireflies and vibrant pinks and purples, or lush with easy care plant life. Here you can purchase supposed specialty versions. You can receive a consultation to have one produced at expense to synchronize perfectly with your inner light. They work best that way, of course. The theory of these talismans is simple enough. Easy to swallow, so to speak. Our bodies have immune systems, but our immune systems are only capable of attacking invaders that they can identify. Radiation, anathema to most life, is the ultimate invader, but our body has no way to detect it. We need an extra eye to see inside ourselves, an eye carved from a sacred and natural resin, formed around shards of radiation shielding that have already weathered the worst of the void. Then we become resistant to radiation. Our bodies can repair the gradual cellular damage exposure incurs, even identify and silence tumors. That's the sales pitch, at least. Yeah, some of my audience might laugh at this, and it is a pretty out there concept. But I urge at least empathy. It's easy to laugh at when you aren't surrounded by radiation at all times, or when you fully understand and trust the equipment at your disposal. And the eyes are cheap, too. 60 new for one at a peddler's booth, or 400 new. Or 400 new if you specially commission it to be in tune with your spirit. Anti-radiation medications, advanced radiation negation systems, high-level training and education on radiation safety, detection equipment, healthcare. All of that costs more than 60 new. Much, much more. And it can be difficult, painful, or worst of all, it might just not work. In each of these talismans, is a promise. A promise that you'll be safe. Sure, it's silly to swallow a carved eye, but desperation can lobby any magical thinking into a sound argument. In each of these talismans is also the scrapings of modern radiation shielding paint, or chippings from ablative deflection paint. The substance is called Zirconium 15D. It's traded as red chromium on the open market, even though it apparently has nothing to do with chromium the metal. Red chromium is only mildly toxic if you eat it. It struggles to pass into the bloodstream through the gut and the intestines. Breathe it consistently over 5 years, say if you're a chemical worker. It'll scar your lungs with tumors and lesions. But stick it in a little sphere of protective resin and swallow it down, and you'll be okay. Relatively speaking, you've swallowed a foreign object. But this is sort of where the logic of these eyes falls apart for me, where my suspension of disbelief gets shattered. If you eat radiation shielding, then your body becomes shielded from radiation. Listeners, I've eaten 100 entire Oscars worth of fish in my life, but try as I might, I can't breathe underwater. These eyes, they join the ranks of plenty of other alternative medicine curatives. Your hyper-diluted hemlock, your ground-up alien fauna. These items, they feel close enough to sound theory that our brains just shrug and drop them in the same bucket as aspirin and cough drops. Here's a dinosaur of thought for you all, listeners. The doctrine of signatures. That's a belief that a caring and benevolent universe has filled itself with things to help out its favorite children. Lungwort looks like lungs, so it'll treat your lung infection, supposedly. Walnuts are kind of like heads, so they'll fix your headaches. Little resin eyes in your belly will help your body see where you can't. But they aren't medicine. Not at all. I've talked about plenty of upset tummies over the course of this episode, but the eyes have it. Almost 1 eye out of every 1,000 dissolves in the stomach, leaving shards of red chromium behind in the gastrointestinal tract. Imagine little tiny knives. Red chromium is very sharp when you flake it, like the eyeball makers do. And these knives are passing right through some of your softest sections. Red chromium isn't poisonous if you eat it, right? But get it into your bloodstream, and it's a potent poison, neurotoxic, causing palsy, seizures, and much worse. Your shit turns black from gastrointestinal bleeds. It stinks bad enough to choke a career healthcare professional. You lose control of your body, and all of this typically happens in flight, far away from dedicated healthcare facilities. A lot of people get very, very sick. Some die before anyone can give them the help they need. It isn't entirely clear why the eyes dissolve. There is still plenty of ambiguity on that front, but there are theories. One possibility is that the resin varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. Some resins survive a stomach acid bath with more aplomb than others. Another theory is that existing resins might break down in conjunction with certain food or drink. To cherry-pick the least savory school of thought, it has been posited that some buyers wanting to save cash on a deliberately expendable product might try to, reuse them. Look, reuse means that after they pass, you give them a hopefully extremely thorough wash and then send them right back through. Recycling, listeners. But the washing and repeated passes through the digestive system might do a number on their integrity. 2 or 3 passes, maybe not so much, but 6 or 7, they explicitly aren't built to last. So what, if anything, can we glean from all these forbidden snacks? That human appetite trumps all reason? That people in space are crazy? No, of course not. I've done enough research. Heck, I've spoken directly to some of the people eating what they shouldn't. They aren't crazy. They're fairly normal people with abnormal appetites. But they have something in common, don't they? Deprivation. They're all deprived. My contact A was forced to eat lousy food, trapped with a broken extrusion system that their company refused to repair. B and C, they were out in the middle of nowhere for months at a stretch, assigned and reassigned to new missions with barely a chance to stock up on supplies. The crew of the Periwinkle were instructed to forego all drink, so they turned to something else for their kicks. And the people who swallow little resin eyeballs are fucking scared. Scared of things they can't see, things they desperately want protection from. I mean, yeah, I don't think anybody out in space should be eating what they eat. Anyone can tell you that keyboard keys and lights aren't food, but the people out there between worlds, between stars, they know that and eat the world around them regardless. They pick and scratch and nibble at the vessels that keep them alive, keep them sheltered from a place where nothing can possibly survive. That's That's sort of why people in Lestrade started eating poisonous fruit and explosive mushrooms in the first place, isn't it? They didn't have better options. That's what this whole trip has been about. Getting to Lestrade and figuring out the origin of their meals. But the origin of Lestrade's cuisine comes from these stories as much as they do from the surface of that distant world, the place I have to go. War can make strange bedfellows, and desperation can lead to even stranger menu items. I should probably hide Ernest's growth pod from people. Don't want anybody trying to eat my little mushroom friend. I'll do it after the podcast. If you ask me, a person who's devoted their entire life to writing, studying, and speaking about food, someone others have called an expert, I say it's rebellion. No, rebellion's not, it's not quite the word I'm looking for. Look around a city sometime, or on older ships, rusted out water towers. There's a slogan that the youth are into. Eat the world. You can't eat the world, of course. The concept is deliberately absurdist, but it's an act of imaginative fantasy violence. It's a cute, impossible dream. The people eating these things are changing their situation, changing the most fundamental rules of their lives. It's escapism of a sort, right? If you don't pick your paycheck and you don't pick your schedule and you don't pick what they serve in flight, then all that's left is scratching and gnawing at the walls of your little prison cell in the stars. I don't know, listeners. Maybe, collectively, we all get a kick out of sticking something shiny in our mouths. Until next time, I'm Oscar Yasoui, former licensed food critic for Palladium, current garbage sorter, and food journalist for the independent podcast Gastronaut. And, I have a confession. I gnaw on my stolen pens. A lot. Don't tell anybody. Thank you very much for listening. Like what you've heard? Want to get more of the kitchen and early access to episodes of Gastronaut? Head on over to the Gastronaut Patreon. For $5, you can get all that and updates about the show. And we get to eat food and pay for audio software. Win-win, right? So come on down to patreon.com/Aaron Kling. That's AARONKLING. See you on the rails, folks.